I have in my possession a secret map by the planners of the New World Order.
Because the global order is changing again.
A new world order.
Moscow hosts Congress on Multipolarity, as you can see linked up on Mark13News.com for February 29, 2024. But behind the Russian Federation are the Kenites on the multipolar end of the globalist spectrum, as opposed to the unipolarist Kenites, as nation continues to rise against nation, meaning the Kenite nation rising against itself through multipolar versus unipolar globalism. Multipolar propagandist Alexander Dugin, who some people call Putin's brain, gave a speech at the Congress on Multipolarity where he said, according to an article published on March 1st, we, meaning Russia, are fighting in Ukraine not against Ukrainians but against the unipolar world, and it's the unipolarist Kenites who, for the most part, control the left-right paradigm symbolized by Ammon and Moab, which is really Stalinism and Trotskyism, with the multipolarist Kenites being in control of Edom, which means red. That's why you see Edom, Ammon, and Moab listed together throughout the Bible, covering both ends of the globalist spectrum, meaning multipolarity through Edom and unipolarity through Ammon and Moab. Remember, Moab burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime, as you can see in Amos chapter 2, verse 1, which was looking forward to the Bolshevik Revolution, orchestrated by Trotsky and financed from Wall Street by the same people that created the Federal Reserve System, as you can see documented in the book Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Anthony Sutton. And then in 1980, the GOP was taken over by the neocons, which are really Trotskyites, with the Democratic Party having been infiltrated by the Stalinists in 1933. And if you go back even further into the history of the left-right paradigm, it wasn't until Andrew Jackson became president that the Democratic Party came into being, and Andrew Jackson was the president that signed the Indian Removal Act into law in 1830, which is the same year the first trumpet began to sound when the four hidden dynasties began to be globalized. 1830 lines up with the hidden dynasty of education, as well as the fourth seal and the first vial. So then 411 as in information, but in this case misinformation. 1830 being when Joseph Henry's foundational research on the electromagnetic telegraph dates back to, according to the Smithsonian Institutional Archives, and from the electromagnetic telegraph came the telephone, radio, television, and finally the internet, whereby the Kenites plant the seed of the mark of the beast that will come to fruition in the foreheads of most Christians at 666 when Satan appears as the Antichrist. That's when Satan's image, as well as the images of his angels, will be transmitted onto all the smartphone, computer, and television screens because of the technology that began to be developed in 1830, which is also when the so-called rapture theory came into being through Margaret MacDonald in Scotland. Then in 1836, a group called the League of the Just was founded, which had its headquarters in Paris up until 1839, and the League of the Just was made up of the most extreme, chiefly proletariat elements of the secret Democratic Republican Outlaws League, according to Engels, who was the co-writer of the Communist Manifesto along with Karl Marx. In 1847, the League of the Just merged with the Communist Correspondence Committee to form the Communist League, which is who Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto for. And then in 1854, the GOP came into being, with the first Republican president being sworn into office in 1861. And during that time, the Kenites were able to control the narrative and shape public opinion more and more through propaganda, with the Associated Press being founded in 1846, while Reuters was established in 1851, all part of the hidden dynasty of education. Then in 1913, the second trumpet began to sound, which lines up with the hidden dynasty of economics, 1913 being when the Federal Reserve System came into being, followed by World War I, and that's when the King of the North in Daniel 11 went from being Tsarist Russia to Soviet Russia, as you can see pointed out in the Daniel 11 hypothesis on biblicalresearchlabs.com. And again, Moab burning the bones of the king of Edom into lime was looking forward to the assassination assassination of Tsar Nicholas II. But in 1920, in Soviet Russia, abortion on demand was made legal, and Ammon ripped up the women with child of Gilead, as you can see in Amos chapter 1, verse 13. And again, 1933 is when the Stalinists took over the Democratic Party, which is documented in the book Stalin's Secret Agents, the subversion of Roosevelt's government. World War II being when the King of the South of Daniel 11 went from being the United Kingdom, including the British Commonwealth, that is to say Ephraim, to Germany, which is Judah. And then at the end of World War II in 1945, the third trumpet began to sound, which lines up with the hidden dynasty of politics, 1945 being when the United Nations came into being, which is the great horn of the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8, in my opinion. And 1945 was also when the United States, which is Manasseh, became the third king of the South, with 1948 being when the fourth trumpet began to sound, which lines up with the hidden dynasty of religion, 1948 being when this final generation began, when Kenite-occupied Israel came into being. Then in 1969, the fifth trumpet began to sound, but 5 means grace in biblical numerics, and it's during the grace period of the fifth trumpet that the seed of the seal of God is being planted in the foreheads of the 144,000. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation became the third king of the North, and as you can see in the Daniel 11 hypothesis, for the king of the North, meaning the Russian Federation, shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And this can be applied to the current events of today, going back to Russia's entry into Syria on September 30th, 2015, and then into Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. And again, Alexander Dugin said at Russia's Congress on Multipolarity, we, meaning Russia, are fighting in Ukraine not against Ukrainians, but against the unipolar world. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the South, which is at this time the United States, but it's for the most part the unipolarist Kenites that are in control of the left-right paradigm, which again is symbolized by Ammon and Moab, which is really Stalinism and Trotskyism. Also, the robbers of thy people, meaning the Kenites obviously, shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, meaning the vision of a new world order as it's called, but they shall fall. And this word translated as fall is in the Hebrew, a word that in this case means to fail, because the one world political system of Revelation 13 won't come into being until after the great horn of the he-goat, which is the United Nations, gets broken and Satan and his angels get cast to earth. And then 2.5 months after the woe of the fifth trumpet, Satan will appear as the Antichrist at the woe of the sixth trumpet. The true Christ won't return until 2.5 months after that at the woe of the seventh trumpet, and not until then. In other words, there's no pre-tribulation rapture as it's called. That's a deception that came about through a mentally ill teenage girl in 1830 when the first trumpet began to sound, and it's when all 6 trumpets of deception are sounding at the same time that Satan will appear as the false Christ. So the king of the North, which is the Russian Federation, shall come and cast up a mountain and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the South shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. And not only is the Ezekiel 38 Confederacy formulating at this time, but you also have the hidden agents of Edom within the media and political parties of the West constantly defending the actions of the Russian Federation and trying to talk the multipolar world order, as it's called, into existence. But they shall fail, because again, the one world political system won't come into being until Satan and his angels get cast to earth. The arms of the South shall not withstand, meaning the global political system that will emerge at the woe of the fifth trumpet can't be stopped, no matter which chosen people, meaning elected officials, are voted into power.